It's two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? And I'm just so grateful to be here. So grateful to be here with you, Aaron. Really been hearing about you from our mutual friend, Anya. We got to give her another plug, but by now I think my audience might, some of them anyway, might know who Anya is just from the first name. She's something else. So I'm grateful we're connected today and having this conversation.
Agreed, man. I'm excited to chat with you. I know that Anya had given me some backstory on you, and I've been hearing about you since I think the day she met you. So when I put two and two together and realized it was you, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun. So here, I'm strapped in, ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. I love her fun spirit, and she's just filled with energy for the things that she sparks with, and yeah, amazing with connecting people and whatnot. So Anya Zybert, look her up. All right. Okay, so Aaron, wow, I don't really know that much about you other than I know you have this background and being a musician and having it sounded like a pretty high level of a success with it. And and then also usually there's that journey, right, where then we crash, like so many people in their lives. It doesn't even matter. Like a lot of times we say, oh, it's the stars, they're the ones that always crash and burn. But a lot of people crash and burn on their pathway no matter what they're doing sometimes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about your story a little bit, as a guy navigating this path, and what led you to doing this work, because you help men now. You're helping to empower men, and I know specifically you talk about narcissistic abuse and things like that, which I'm super super curious about what you have to share about that. So, but yeah, tell us about yourself. What brought you on this journey to be a conscious male leader for other guys that are waking up and want to be more empowered?
Yeah, so I kind of go all over the place with things. I can see the through line with what I'm saying, but if you ever feel lost, like, and you need to rein me back in, please rein me back in.
No problem.
I basically, I also did a little reading on you beforehand, and I could say some similar things about myself. Like, I was born into this world very connected and understanding things, very intuitive, to the point, another rabbit hole, but I was given the Christian version of an exorcism because I could see things, hear things, new things, and be like, how does he know these things, right? So I just had that connection. I always felt a little bit off and a little bit out of place, and yet I've really stepped into that in the recent years, actually, probably in the recent decades. And so, as you mentioned, I started out as a musician. So there's a lot of interesting facets about myself that I've been told about myself, that are arising me to share right now. Because when I work with people, whether it's men or anybody, I've been working with people for literally all my life, but really, really focused for the last few decades. And I found that there's a lot of programs and a lot of false identities to unravel. And although I've had my own share, of course, I've approached them differently, and I've experienced them a little bit differently. But as I'm talking to people like you and Anya, I'm finding out that there's more similarities now than I knew. It's almost like we were all just kind of quiet, and now we're all kind of coming out and talking and sharing with each other, right? Yes. So, I started out just really loving life and loving people and everything. And even my music days, I spent 25 years in the music industry with super long hair, and I've written in 8 different genres and toured the world and stuff. And all my music was always introspective. It was always very deep and personal, and I had no shame, right? And it was always about inspiring others and uplifting people. And my favorite parts of that was after the show, or being on stage with the show, but after the show. And just a funny little story on that, like you'll hear stories in the rock and roll days where it's hard to find everybody to get them on the bus to go to the next town. Well, my tour manager would love me out of the gate. He's like, man, Aaron, you're amazing. I don't have to go looking in the bars for you. I don't have to try to carry you out from being drunk because I wasn't drinking or anything. At the beginning of the tour, the manager would love me because he could find me because I'd be in the venue still talking to all the fans. But after a few shows, after he'd rounded up everybody else, he couldn't get me out of the venue to leave. So I was the hardest one to leave. Easiest to find, but hardest to get on the bus to leave. So it's just because I've always loved working with people. And, you know, I branched into other things. I've hit home runs in the health and fitness industry, and I've created programs and transformation programs that are all over the world now and that. And I have methodologies that I kind of iterated on throughout my life that I bring into everything I do now. And most recently, which I feel arising to talk about this today before we got on, is that I have lived one of these lives where people want my life, right? And they think my life is easy and perfect. And I speak on manifestation, and right. And I speak about peace, ease, and freedom. And I'm a very neutral person. Like nothing bothers, nothing offends me, nothing embarrasses me, never has, right? So that doesn't mean I don't have my share of hurdles and dark nights of the soul, right? And so what's really been interesting in this last year of my life is I had spent decades at a level of very like deep inner peace and helping people and really not having any massive struggles, or as I put it, I don't resist resistance. So like people, you don't have any resistance. I'm like, no, I just don't resist resistance. But then all of a sudden, there's a facet in my life that needed work, that I needed to be elevated in, and I felt like a baby again. Like I literally could only be the witness. I couldn't even change my actions at certain points. All I could do was watch the ego programs and paradigms and everything play out, right? Until the energy dissipated enough for me to make an action. So I know that's kind of framing stuff, but yeah, I've moved into helping men. I've just come out of an 11-year domestic violence relationship where I was the victim of that relationship. I was victimized, whole nother rabbit hole. I didn't like being called a victim because I've always been about personal responsibility. But I realized in the areas that I didn't know what was going on, I was victimized because I had no idea, right? And so through that, in my situation anyway, yes, there's custody issues with children. We're fighting in that. There's now legal and administrative abuse that I'm facing. There's all these things that I'm facing that I see so many other men face, and they're quiet about. And they don't necessarily talk about it. As I've started to be openly sharing without shame, I literally share everything, right? And to a degree where it's strategic, but anything that is now in the legal documents and the courts and stuff comes out of my mouth now, right? It's already out there, so I can talk about it. And I do it also in a way that I think is really important. That it's about me, it's about my journey, it's about my healing. So some of the things that I went through and that I share that I went through are pretty shocking and are pretty crazy when you first hear them, or at least the way people receive them. They think that's crazy. And I always frame, and I'll do it here now, is I have nothing against my ex. I have nothing against my children's mother. I want her to grow. I want her to heal. I want her to thrive. So everything I share is framed in that, right? I have nothing but love to send her, right? I feel empathy for her, right? And I'm working on myself. So when I share these stories, it's really truly about how it's affecting me and what I'm unpacking and the gifts I'm unwrapping from this seemingly horrific time of my life, right? This decade of my life. So I'll pause there because I could keep going and we'll see which
Right. No, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I mean, it's fun. I don't know. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but find highly creative musician types are that way. I mean, it's not exclusive to
Yeah.
such a group, but like I find like that's true. Like it's like we get on a roll, but you guys are good at checking yourself into from the other people like yourself I've had on the show. But but it's fun. I love your energy. So. Wow, I mean that's really remarkable in terms of like yeah, like usually people are like yeah, it's drugs, it's this, is that, it's like like a dark night of the soul like hit me big time and like usually it's that sort of thing, but for you it was more like you're more like no, it's more like I was more in a Zen state sort of and like it's what it sounds like neutral and but yet you had this thing going on with the domestic violence you said
Mhm.
so was it one of those things where for you because it's like again there's this big difference I would imagine I don't know but I would imagine there's a big difference between the way, in some levels, the way it's experienced with a guy versus a woman, right? But I think one of the common denominators is you could minimize or try to, deny that it's even happening. Like there's really even an issue, right? So I was wondering, maybe I'm sort of tuning in and just from what you said, but like, was some of that what was going on is like, there was things were going on, and yet part of you was like, well, but that's not, well, she was just upset or what, whatever, all the other kind of things that people say to try to make it seem like nothing's really oh, it's okay. I was wondering if that was going on or how that showed up for you.
And this is such an awesome question because I really want other men to be able to look at their lives and figure this stuff out because I didn't see it. And one of the main things I'll preface as I say this is I had to get out of the water to dry off. I was soaked and drowning until I got out of the water, started to dry off, started to feel a little better. I didn't even remember the things that had happened until I was a few months out of this. Okay. Because the trauma was so much that I was in the fight, flight, fawn, or whatever it's called, where I was in a fight or flight mode and whatever the other couple ones are called there, constantly for a couple year period. And I go into the physical aspects too, the physical health issues that I faced. But you're right. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't, and I also justified it. So I really dive deep when I'm trying to figure out where I'm not yet free, right? Where am I not free here? What do I need to do? And I've studied every school of thought from religion to numerology to astrology, you name it, right? So in this journey, I also went into, I'd already studied the brain and neural pathways, but I went into early child development. I'm like, let me look at that school of thought. And come to find out that my mother has a narcissistic personality disorder, and I recognize narcissistic abuse as love. And therefore, all my relationships, that's what I resonated towards. That's what I wanted, was that abuse, right? Because that's what I registered as love from my first 3 to 5 years of my life. That's the way my neural pathways were carved. So I realized that. And once I started, this is all in retrospect, after I'm out of the relationship, after I'm out of the water and I'm drying off. Okay.
Right.
So I understood, and there's a lot of stigmas in there in the world around men being abused and women being abused. And I'm here to tell you, there's way more men abused than people know. The numbers are starting to come out because men are starting to talk about it. It used to be like 7 out of 10 women and like 2 out of 10 men. Now it's like at least 4 out of 10 men. But then when you talk to the experts that I'm working with, they're like, that's 4 out of the 10 men that have talked about it and have come forward. Right. And it's actually increasing as people come forward. So as I'm getting to your question here, but I had to get out of the water, start to dry off, go through that traumatic few months, which was literally horrific. Talk about dark night, the darkest nights of my life, right? Where I couldn't do anything. I could just watch myself doing things. Right. And I can get into that. But then when I started to come out of that, I also decided, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. I'd never really been one who'd gone to therapy because I was a freaking coach, a mindset coach. I helped everybody through this stuff. I should have the tools, right? So I started with, because I just one day was broken and just didn't know what to do. And I reached out to a domestic violence shelter, and I found one that worked with men. Not many do. There's like 1 to every 10, you know what I mean? So that's one of the things I want to shift in the industry. But I did 3 months of therapy with them where they sat down and they asked me questions. And then I started to have all these aha moments like, oh my gosh, not only was I justifying what she was doing, taking on the blame for it, thinking if I could just be better and be able to coach her better and love her better, she would grow through this. But I also had no idea some of the things that she was doing were actually domestic abuse. I took them as love. For example, she would track everywhere I went with my phone. And if I wasn't where she thought I was supposed to be, which the tracking doesn't necessarily work well. So it's funny now when I look at it, but I'd be in the grocery store and she'd be texting me, what are you doing at Taco Bell? I'm like, I'm not at Taco Bell. I'm at the store. And I call her and show her the store. But because it's not so accurate, Taco Bell's on the other side of the parking lot, right? And I wasn't home on time. She could me, and my brain would say, oh, she loves me. She's checking on me. And when I went to this therapist, like, no, she's tracking you. This is abuse. This is control. Oh. So I literally learned not only the physical abuse, which yes, there's these ups and downs in the physical abuse from literally the first month we met, which I didn't really realize because I was in a justification mode. And I was also in just the childhood trauma that kind of governed the way I saw women in relationships.
Mhm.
But we would have these times where it was bad and then it was good again and it was bad. And then we split up and got back together. It was good for a while, then it got really bad. And the last year from February to November 3rd, she hit me 17 times physically. So I knew the physical stuff. I was to the point where I couldn't handle the physical, but then I learned, which I honestly think is way more detrimental, at least in the most cases with men. I'm not saying that a woman can't physically harm a man, because there is black eyes and stuff I have pictures of
Oh,
and stuff,
yeah.
right? But the psychological and the mental and emotional was even worse. Okay.
Right.
And I learned about the psychological, the emotional, the mental abuse, the financial abuse. There was massive financial abuse, the control, the legal and administrative abuse. We didn't even get into the 12 false allegations she filed with me saying I molested my children, which I didn't. All investigated and disproved and closed, right? So I saw all these other facets of abuse that I didn't know. And then retrospectively with my therapist, got to go back through that journey of 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, that started here. Oh, it was going on here. Whereas in my brain was only registering the physical abuse. The rest I was blaming myself for. And even the physical abuse, I was thinking if I could just help her not get that riled up, then
Right.
okay. And then there was a part of me that would actually beg her to hit me at certain times, because the psychological and the mental abuse was so hard to handle.
Mhm.
I wish you could just hit me again. Because when she did, she would decompress.
Right.
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 And so again, I want to put this in here because I know things can get taken out of context for those that are listening. I have nothing against her. She has her own journey and her own issues that she's working with. I'm talking about how they affected me and how I'm healing through it. But I'm not making her wrong or bad for those things that she did. I want people to know that. She's got her own trauma that led to this, which I've studied and learned, right? But I'm dealing with how that trauma affected me and how I ended up traumatizing myself through that trauma, right? So
Right.
to your question, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't see it. And yes, I justified it. I put it on my shoulders, blame myself for it. And over the last 12 months, I've looked at every school of thought I could think of to figure out why I did that, so I could unravel it and not do it again.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, wow. I don't know that I've had quite a few guys on now, and I actually don't forget how many episodes we're at now, but we're up probably 100 something, I'm guessing. I have no idea. Isn't that weird? But I don't know for sure. I don't usually count like that. But my point is, I don't think I've had a guy on that I can remember in recent memory, at least, that has talked about this, like that they have gone through this sort of abuse. And I don't know if that's because it hasn't happened or they just never brought it up. Now I'm going to wonder, like, okay, I wonder if some of these guys actually have had a history with this, but it just never came up in our conversation because it's that repressed. It's that under the veil or whatever. Because you wouldn't want to, it's like, come on, what's wrong with you as a guy? Your wife's abusing you, right? I mean, that
Yep.
kind of stigma, and even by women and men, right? Uh, yeah, my spouse is abusing me. She's kicking my butt. Okay, all right. Like some people wouldn't have much of a reaction, and other people would say horrible, right? So it's but with women, universally, pretty much everybody's going to be totally outraged and
Yeah.
like we have to save you, and there is a higher risk with the physical aspect of it, of course, but I'm just saying like it's taken differently. But I find like I have had an expert on who actually was in the system, like she was in Canada, but she was in the system of helping women with domestic violence, and there was men that wanted to get help, and it was a similar kind of runaround. Like they didn't really have anything set up to help the men. They didn't really want to. It sounded like, and she talked about all. She really laid it out good for the guys. It's a good episode. Boy, I wish I could remember her name off the top of my head. I'm not great with that stuff sometimes either, because I'm a channel, I guess. Right? That's my excuse. But anyway,
Mhm.
she had a bunch of great stuff to share, resources, everything, and so we'll link that episode in here also because I think it'll be helpful to everybody.
Yeah.
So, but my point is that yeah, it's way underreported, and there's so many guys they literally try to get help and they can't even get help. She also talked about that. They're looking for help. I have nowhere to go. There's nowhere to get help. Nobody will take me. Nobody will help me. And so, that's kind of one of the one of the big things is how do these guys get help? But so I'd love to hear about that at some point. We can get into that, um, but I'm wondering. I wanted to break down first, maybe like break down like this whole thing where we tend, men and women will tend to try to put the blame on themselves. Some of us, you know, there's a certain type of person, right? I imagine there's this type of person that would do that, right? And like, what can I, especially if you're in a motivational, personal responsibility and all that, we tend to go in that direction. All right, it's all me, it's my consciousness, it's me, you know, she's just a reflection of me, therefore, and all that's true, really, in my opinion, there's a truth in it. But then it can go into like it's all about, to me, to an extreme level, you know, like, okay, yeah, but you know, there is this thing happening, and you know, doesn't mean that you should stay in the abuse and just try to work through it in the
Right.
abuse, you know, like, so it doesn't mean that either. So there's a lot of stuff there. So there's the people that be listening to this are more people are in the personal development and all that. So if they're in a situation, and let's say it's not as obvious to them, maybe they're in earlier stages that you're in, like they're okay, they're tracking you and all that, or something else. Like, what are some of the signs that this sort of thing's even happening? The ones that you mentioned, one, you know, there, but what are some of the other signs that were going on that you can see now clearly, but at the time you didn't make much of a deal of? You're like, oh, whatever. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
So there was a lot of withholding of any sort of affection, even to the point of any sort of recognition that I was there. So she would utilize that. She would do me completely silent treatment me and stuff like that. And there was a lot of gaslighting, and I didn't understand what that statement meant, but I'll tell you how extreme it got and how it was for me, where she would say something to me on a text message, and I would say, "Why did you say that?" And she would say, "I didn't say that." And I would hold the phone up and show her the text message, and she would tell me she didn't send it. And I would lay in bed all night saying, "Who hacked my phone? How did
Wow.
this message get on my?" I literally, that's how bad my brain was in
Wow.
believing what she had to say. She was very convincing. So there was
Mhm.
a lot of that. There was a lot of subtle psychological abuse, keeping me from doing everything that I did. I was a touring musician. I was speaking on stages around the world. She slowly took all that away from me. I was in extremely good physical shape. She slowly took that away. And I say took that away because at first I was like, she can't control me. I'm my own, blah, 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 blah. But I realized through the psychological abuse and the trauma, I didn't know what was happening. It was little by little by little by little till I found myself honestly, when we get in the physical talk we talk about it, I found myself with kidney failure and a heart attack, which is now all through the doctors and the therapists tied to the trauma. Okay.
Right.
Not physical problems. It was acute stress and trauma that caused it. Right. And it builds, it builds, it builds, it builds. Right. And
Mhm.
again, I would see this stuff and thinking, oh, well, maybe if I'm nicer to her, she'll be nicer. And maybe if I say good morning to her, she'll say good morning to me and stuff like that. But she would use that silent treatment and um, that kind of psychological abuse and that kind of gaslighting, and to make me crazy and make me
Yeah.
question reality, like really question reality. And I didn't see that when I was in it. And even now, as I'm going through and I think of some of the times, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was another time. I'm like, wow, now it's clear as day. But like I said, I was soaking wet. I had to dry off. And the drier I get, the healthier I get, the more I can see what was actually going on. So you want to watch for that kind of the control factors, and they can be extremely subtle with
Mhm.
physical affection, right? And people put that in there. Like when you think about that, the physical affection stuff, you'll see stuff all over, like men like sex more than women and they're just not in the mood. That could be true, but it's also an abuse tactic. It's also
Mhm.
a power play on their part, at least in the relationship that I was in a narcissistic or someone with those tendencies, right? It's a power play. So just little things, and even keeping me around the house, like to where I loved grocery shopping. My dad's the one that did the shopping when we were kids, right? And so it was one of my ways that I loved my family. I loved to go to the store and get everything everybody wanted. She would even orchestrate it to where I couldn't go, where she would get the shopping done. And I'm
Mhm.
like, why is she doing that? She knows I love shopping and stuff like that. So even little things like that that meant a lot to me were taken away, right?
Mhm.
Slowly but surely
Wow.
taken away. And it was hard to see when you're in the middle of it. And it's easy to justify, oh, she's just not feeling good right now. She's depressed. I should be sensitive to that. And She was. Sometimes she was extremely depressed, and I thought it was all my fault. But I look back now and wonder, was she depressed? Like there's
Right.
so many times now that I've walked through situations with my therapist where I don't know what was actually real and what was actually orchestrated and contrived now.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's so many facets. So there's got to be, like most things, there's a huge continuum to a partner. In this case, probably a wife, but it could be whoever your partner is, right? Whatever way you are with that. But like your partner is, let's say it's a wife, though, particularly in this case, because it's a different type of dynamic. But okay, they're like, oh, that's me. Like, there's might be a couple things you said that resonate on my end a little bit, but then there's a huge continuum, right? Like, well, it's one thing like where, it's being used here or there selectively. And there's other thing where it's an overall pervasive pattern, where most all the time that's what's happening, right? I mean, there's a huge continuum in different ways it can show up, I would imagine. Is that what you've seen with some of the guys you've been helping?
Yeah. And to go back to one of the other things you said, just to inject this, is
Yeah,
that
sure.
there's conversations I'm having with people now that I've known for 10, 15, 20 years who are now telling me that they had been abused too. It never came up, right? We didn't talk about it. But now that I'm talking about it, it's like opening the door for a
Right.
lot of other people to talk about it. So when you said you've talked to so many men and nobody really brought it up, I guarantee it's been there, with some of
Right, exactly. That's what I'm thinking now. I'm like,
them.
there must have been a few in there at least.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm finding very similar things, and I'm finding in essence some of the exact same things. So, for example, one of the gentlemen I knew him before. Again, didn't know anything was going on. He didn't know anything was going on with me. I hid it from the world. I literally hid it from the world. So a lot of people were shocked, but then they started to go, "Oh, it makes sense." Like they'd see my weight go up. All of a sudden, I'm not speaking in events anymore. They didn't, you know what I mean? Heart
Mhm.
attack, all this stuff. They're starting to put the dots together. So I'm talking to this one gentleman yesterday and different, younger, a baby's involved and stuff like that. And he reached out to me because he wanted to know how to deal with false allegations because I've dealt with that already, right?
Mhm.
And he said that she accused him of physically abusing her and stuff like that. He's like, I never did. And
Right.
even the situation that she said I did it in, there's plenty of witnesses there that said that it didn't even happen, but she still put it out there in the world and people believe it. And he wanted to know how to deal with it. So it's different. Like she's gone crazy on social media and defamed me and everything and gone to Department of Children and Families in Florida, which is CPS, right? Child Protective Services, all that stuff. I've dealt with all of that over the last 12 months and I've literally faced it all and gotten it all dropped, closed, dismissed, all that stuff, right? But now I'm finding other men who are dealing with that. And they're like, and when I've also studied narcissism and borderline personality disorders and met with experts and read books to understand what caused her to be how she was. That's just the part of me that wants to help people. Whether or not she'll listen or I even intend to help her anymore directly, I don't, right? At least now. But at least understanding what helped made her tick, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, right? And I
Right.
knew some of the stuff. So some of the exact same essence of what they're doing. I mean, the variables are different, but they're doing the exact same thing. If they're not able to get a rise out of the male, they come up with something harsher to say. They create something and make
Mhm.
it up and they put it out there because they're trying to get your reaction. And one of the things that I learned from the experts, and you'll hear, and I really want to say, guys, there's so much stuff out there on narcissism right now that is not true. Just because somebody is seemingly selfish or out for themselves doesn't make them narcissistic. You know what I mean? All of us, when we're struggling, or even if we're in a state of self-love, can look narcissistic at certain points, right?
Right.
So there's so much out there that's just not true. And everybody's kind of using that word in a way that is really doesn't make any sense in my world. But anyway,
Right.
um, what I found is that they have this tendency to, if they're not getting the attention, if they're not getting that, out of the person, they'll keep going. And what then they do is they push, they push until you do something, and then they're the victim to what you just did. They showcase how you reacted to everybody, but nothing that they did to pull that reaction out of you.
Right. Right.
Right. So, for example, just to be completely transparent here, my last day there on November 3rd, she hit me. And when she hit me, I went into fight or flight, screamed at her to get out of my way, to get out of the house. All the kids saw was me screaming at mom.
Yeah.
All she told everybody is that I screamed at her.
Mm.
Follow me?
Yeah.
So, but then when I've talked to other men or even talked to a therapist, they're like, you were in fight or flight. You were in a reactive mode. You couldn't change that. You couldn't stop that. If anybody gets punched in the back of the head as hard as they can, they're not going to just sit there and laugh it off. You know what I mean? They're probably going to. So that
Right.
I was actually many times with all the therapists and people I've talked about were shocked that I didn't hit her back or even
Mm-hmm.
have a desire to, right? Because that
Right.
commonly happens, right?
Right.
But I just every time she would get physically abusive, I'd try to get away as fast as I could. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what she stood with. Oh, he yelled and screamed at me. You know what I mean? Stuff like that, right? But they
Yeah.
don't talk about what led up to that. So I'm getting very, very similar stories with false allegations to somebody's been provoked until they just can't handle it anymore. Right. And then the narcissistic, the one with the tendencies, that personality, then all of a sudden is holier than thou. And how dare you speak to me that way? And is out telling them that they're abusive and verbally abusive and aggressive and all this kind of stuff. Right.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
it happens. Literally, I'm getting that scenario of story pretty much with every man I talk to varying degrees, to varying extremity. Like some are extreme, some are not as extreme, but it's the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of scenario in essence, the same kind of pattern playing out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and and then it's like then they're in control. The idea they're in control, right? Because they're innocent, they're the victim. Now you need to make it right. And the type of guy that they're with, a lot of times, anyway, it sounds like, are going to be the type that are like, okay, maybe I need to do something different, right? Or otherwise, the relationship won't last. I mean, they won't be attracted to that guy because that's the game they're playing. Okay. Now, what are you going to do to make up for it? Basically, what it comes down to, with whether they say it or not, right? Now, what's going to change? How's it going to change going forward so we don't have this problem again, right? I can
Yeah.
hear it right now. So, I mean, yeah, and then you're bought in because you figure, well, maybe even if you think like maybe she's wrong, you're still thinking, well, yeah, I could do better. Okay, maybe I did create this. Maybe it is on me more so, right?
Yeah.
So I could see a lot of guys going that, especially if they're more conscientious guys. I mean that they're like looking at themselves that way, which again would be pretty much anybody that's listening in. So if you're in that situation, now you're out of a situation, you've done all this stuff, you're helping, but like the people are in the middle of it. What suggestions do you have for them? If they're like, man, the more you talk, the more I'm thinking that's me. Is there ways of assessing more? If because they may still try to deny it, right? Well, maybe it's not as bad as his, or where do they go for help? What can they do? I almost feel like, I used to be a therapist and everything, so we have different assessments and whatnot. And I imagine there's got to be one for stuff like this, but I don't recall one at the time I was in practice. But are there measures or the ways that people, I'm sure there are out there. Are you aware of any? Where can they go for help? How can they figure this out, so to speak?
So there is way more resources for women than men. That's one of the things that with the movement that I've started, we're working to change. Okay.
Right.
Now, a lot of the suggestions I'll give, I will preface and put in there that I did not take my own suggestions when I was in it. Right. So part of the thing I'm solving for is how do we help men? How do we create the space to where this stuff can come out
Mhm.
before it's coming out in some horrific way like I've had to experience, right? So I would say like the things I've done, if I could have gone to therapy earlier, I would have, but I
Mhm.
couldn't because I didn't. You know what I mean? What I really am finding is helpful is creating communities for men to come into and just start to establish a relationship and feel safe and see other men who are on a healing journey or who have healed, who are more conscious and are vulnerable. And when they're vulnerable, it opens up the door for these conversations. So I've been doing this to a degree for the last handful of years anyway, right? With men's mental health groups and stuff. And we haven't spearheaded it towards narcissistic abuse or intimate partner violence and that kind of stuff, but it's definitely going to be, it's part of it now. But I found that when we start creating these communities and give men a place to go or recommend, hey, just come listen in. You don't even have to be on camera, right? It
Mhm.
starts to allow them to have a safe space to maybe it's okay. And sometimes the way it's worked out is I've done this in the past, I'll see them on the call, I'll make notes on the call, and every now and then one of them, they'll pop their camera on and they'll say hello and they'll start to break down, they'll start to share, or they'll send me an email. I don't really want people to know who I am or talk about it yet, but can we chat, you know? So I think one of the most powerful things that I'm doing is creating or bringing community back to men in a vulnerable way, in an open way, where we're truly helping them understand that the collective consciousness, meaning the old ways of doing things, of man up and men are strong and you should be silent and quiet, that's not even, I don't want to put it in a bucket of good, bad, right, or wrong, but let's just call it the old ways. Let's evolve that way and help men understand that to truly be empowered, you need a balance of masculine and feminine energy. You need that vulnerability. Vulnerability is strength. You know what I mean? And literally showing that, creating the space, projecting and inviting them into it, slowly but surely, I'm seeing people open up. And I've also, as I've done this consistently before, the compounding effect kicks in. More and more people start to open up, right?
Yes.
But yes, do we need other services that are state funded and everything like that? That like Female says, absolutely. I have a whole, in the website I'm building out, I have a whole resource section, global, US and global. I'm working with, I'll just put this in here now. I'm working with a lady named Denise Hines. She is the foremost expert in the US and worldwide on intimate partner violence, male victims, female perpetrators. She's been working on this for over 20 years. Last year, she trained the FBI on how to recognize female narcissists and female abusers. So she's really trying to help, and she's just got her next $1 million grant to do another study on it. So she's very much behind this, and she's like, we locked arms, and she's given me all the resources and stuff. So through her, I'm helping that. And the other thing I'll just put on here as something we can talk about is the other branch of what we're doing with the Empower Men movement. We have the healing aspect. Ultimately, we want to help people. I'm broken, I need to heal. I am in a survival mode. I'm a survivor, but that's not the end. Let's get you thriving, right? And in my journey in the last few decades and all the programs I've built, my favorite thing is when you take someone who's just, right? Whether it was in my gym programs and they felt their problem was I'm overweight. I know that's true. You know that's not true, right? It's all up here, right? As we lost the weight up here and the weight down here, what happened? They wanted to do things that they thought they'd never want to do again, but even better, they started to have new aspirations of things they never even thought of doing before. So we're building out this space for people to step in to be healed, to become a survivor. But that's not the end. That's another false identity. And there's nothing wrong with that identity, by the way. There's nothing wrong with any of these. But move them into thriving and all the resources they need to thrive, which includes, I know I'm putting a lot on the plate here. There's a lot to talk about.
We're good.
Americans for Judicial Accountability, where we're actually changing the legislature in family law. We have 2 new laws in. There's 5 more coming. So we're changing all these issues that have with men and women and custody issues and parenting and abuse and how it's played out in all these different sectors. We're shifting it all over the place as we go.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many things with this, and like I remember when we had this guest, and I am remembering 1 or 2 guests that actually did have a big story around their wives or their partners. But it's not most of them, you know, like not as many as I think it really is. So, but anyway, getting back to this, what I'm thinking about is how I was told by the one expert that came on from Canada I mentioned before. She said one of the issues for guys to get help is they say, but you don't understand, it's impossible. If I go on one of these support calls, my wife will know, and then I'll get in trouble again, and you know I'll get hit again or whatever. And because they're literally, as you know, they're literally monitoring every single thing that you're doing, every single thing. They're looking at your phone, they're looking at your text messages, they're looking at what you're looking at on your computers, or what, you know, what are your emails? They're looking at everything when they're really full blown, right? They're totally over everything. So they cannot do one thing without them ultimately finding out, is what some of them will say. So I'm curious how you handle that aspect, because that definitely is one of the things I heard is a common theme for these guys.
Couple ways. So I always recommend, and it's hard to get them to do that because I didn't do it, you know, and I get it. When you're in that, when you're drowning in that, you don't know what to do. You're afraid of being judged. You think nobody's going to believe you. I'm 250. She was 100 pounds. I mean, all that stuff was going to my head, right? So I had to take time. I had to do it when I could. I had to try to find somebody I trusted, or at least do things that helped me feel good. So one of the things I started doing is I forced myself out of bed at 4:30 and I'd go to the beach every morning for an hour. And that helped me decompress and reset a little bit. Did it help me heal? No. But it helped me, albeit only sustain more trauma when it comes down to it, but it did help. It did give me some openings, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing we're doing around that, because I'm always looking at these things like you're saying, I like, how can we solve this one? So one of the things we're doing is we're creating these groups in corporate organizations. We're creating men's safe spaces, and I don't want it to get the stigma of safe spaces like, you know, people are talking about the, you know, people who are not, and we don't even go down that rabbit hole, but that's been the thing.
Don't want to confluence the two ideas. Yeah, that's different.
We're creating this space where men can go be with men and be vulnerable and talk with men, right?
Right.
We're doing that in these giant organizations, right? And they're embracing it, right? And so, and of course, and both ways, men and women, the control factor goes both ways. And can some of the women who hear your podcast and hear us talking about this and then go, where's these organizations? You know what I mean? Try to find, sure, but I don't worry about that. I'm focusing on what I want, not what I don't want. But what we're trying to do is like, okay, if they're being tracked like I was and they're being controlled and they're watching every move, how can we help them in an area of their life where they're out at work and the partner isn't tracking them other than, okay, they're at work? How can we insert something in their day at work that can help them where they're already going to do something that's accepted in the relationship and start to give them something?
Yeah.
Right. Start to give a little bit of energy that they can build off of. And relationships. The biggest thing is relationships. I like when we do some of these events and stuff, and I know guys are gonna, some people when I say this be like, well, that'll never be me. And I love it when they say that because it's always them. We're all crying at certain points, right? All the tears are coming out, right? And people are like, oh my God. And like some people are like, nobody's gonna know about this. You didn't record this, dude. You were not sharing this. And I'm like, nope, this is private. This, you know, and everybody signs what they need to sign and stuff like that. So what we're doing is trying to solve that to an extreme level where there's somebody's as controlled as I was. How can they still get some help or at least a space to step into? They might not realize they're getting help. They might think it's something totally different, but we know that we're inviting them into a space where they can start to at least get a little bit of clarity, start to dry off a little bit, right? And hopefully that'll help. So that's one of the first things that we're doing. We're doing that with different men's groups and different organizations and different big, humongous, like one of the companies I'm partnered with is, you know, 35-year-old company with hundreds of thousands of members all over the world in every single company you can think of. So we're doing it with them.
Yeah, that's great.
Start inviting men to this, and this is bringing people from literally they have what do you call it, chapters all over the world with this company because they've been around for 35 years, right? And I'm good friends with the owner and founder of that company. He's like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm not going to say even the name of it yet, but we have a name for that group and everything, and we're kind of sneaking it in. It's not like we're trying to be private with it, but we're being somewhat covert on when we're going to have it happen. It's going to be tacked on to the end of another call that everybody's already coming to, men and women are coming to, but it's going to be a kind of a breakout at the end that only men will be allowed to go to. And we're going to start with that. This global organization, right?
No, that's great. I mean, because that is a way, at least for men in corporate and whatnot, that kind of model, like where, okay, you can't track me at work when I'm just talking to people, you know, and stuff like that, right? So that's really cool. At least not yet, right? Find a way to track everything, maybe, but not at this point. So, but yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. Because a lot of this online stuff, you know, yeah, it's a lot. You know, you try to clear it from the computer, but they get sophisticated. They know how to they know how to find the searches even after you delete them, right? They just keep digging into it, and they just waiting to pounce on you. I know it sounds so extreme, but it's true. You know it. So but so yeah, and then the subject I wanted to talk about is when kids are involved. So even if they're like, well, I could get free, but then what's going to happen with the kids? The kids are under, are under her basically, and I have seen this happen before. I know, I don't know what the veracity of the story is, but I know somebody in my life who said, has been around for a while, and he said that what happened is that his wife at the time turned everything again against him. Everything was his problem, without getting into the details, but everything was his problem. And then she turned the kids completely against him. It's been all his fault. And then this is a trauma he's been dealing with for years and years and years, that he's lost his connection. Even now that the mom is dead, he still cannot make headway in connecting with these kids because they were so convinced he was wrong. So,
Yeah.
and maybe I shouldn't say that. This isn't going to inspire anybody, but right. But I want to address the problems that come up that are real for these guys, that they might lose their connection with their kids forever. And, what do you say to people that are worried about that? Because I'm sure that's a big worry of theirs too.
This is such a huge topic, and one that is the hardest part for me,
Yeah.
the hardest thing that I've had to deal with. So there's a long journey of this answer for you, because I think it's really relevant that people hear all this. So I come from, and I want people to hear the variables, because one of the things I'm working with people is to help them understand their own variables and then start to connect the dots. I come from a family that my father still hugs me to this day, kisses me on the forehead, and calls me honey and dear. Very affectionate. Okay. She comes from a family that they never have even spoken the words "I love you" to each other and don't hug at all. No. Right. Now, there's other trauma in her past too that caused the closure and stuff like that. Right. So from there, we had a problem. Right. Now, opposites attract. Right. But couldn't we bridge that? Apparently we couldn't, but right. But opposites do attract. Right. So I also had, we're seeking personal responsibility here. I also had the neural pathways that recognized narcissistic abuse as love. Okay. So when I met her, it was just, that's what I was used to. So I fell in love with it. This is great. It's wonderful, And so I want people to understand this, because I started to wise up to a degree. Um, so 3 years, we were together 3 years, and I left her in 2016. Okay. We got divorced, right? I went to therapy, but I didn't know all the things that had gone on, so I didn't talk about them. I knew the physical abuse and stuff like that, but I was still more in a mode where I still love her. I'm horrible. My marriage failed, which I had to also, just to put a thing on, I had to learn to sort the relationship with her breaking down and my belief and dream of what I wanted a family to be breaking down, right? Two separate things, technically, that inform each other, but the energy was around my lifelong dream, not really her, right? That was more heartbreaking. So therapist said, do not get back together with her unless she agrees to therapy for herself and for you. She's only gone to one therapy appointment with me in the whole 11 years, and she walked out of it, okay, because of what the therapist said to her. So I didn't hold the boundaries. This is important to understand, because we repeat our lessons, period. We just do. I didn't hold the boundaries. I took her back in 2019. Okay. Things were good. Right. And there's a whole thing for my health, that I was back healthy, thriving in every way, shape, or form, financially, mentally, spiritually, physical, everything. Right. Took her back. We had another child. So we had a child originally in 2014. Right. So our daughter was 2. Berlin was 2 when I left. Okay. Then we had another child in 2020. But let me go back to this part. Berlin and she's a complete daddy's girl, inseparable. We have a 50-50 custody agreement, which is she's in violation of, totally different other conversation, but she's in violation, contempt of that. But we have a 50-50 agreement for time sharing and custodial everything. It's not like we're both equally in everything. And so when we had this split in California, because we were in California, it was 4 days me, 3 days her, stuff like that. Very quickly, it was 5 days me, 2 days her, 6 days me, 1 day her, because Berlin wanted to be with daddy. So inevitably, I would either go pick her up about 10 o'clock at night, or she'd bring her back at 10 o'clock at night. And we got in this fine ebb and flow. She had her life. She wanted to go work and stuff. I let her come see Berlin whenever. We'd drive and see her at the restaurant she was working at. I even paid for her and her other son, who was not from our marriage, to travel with us to keep the relationship strong. Okay. With the kids. So Berlin became a daddy's girl, and just inseparable. Now, she did not like that. Part of the abuse was around that. where she hated it, how much Berlin always wanted to come where I was going. So we get back together. Things are going well. We have another child in May of 2020. Okay. Now, when I left on November 3rd, I had been a full-time dad, and I'm not faulting anybody for the way they live their life, but I dreamed of having children. I spent 25 years in the music industry touring. I started old. I'm 50 and I have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, right? All my friends have grown kids and everything. She's younger, she's 14 years younger than me, right? So I started and I come in, I'm like, I'm going to be a full-time dad. So every business I built, I committed to being a full-time dad. Okay. So with that, I would sing Berlin to Wake with You Are My Sunshine every morning. I would make them breakfast. I would homeschool them. Literally, I was every day, 24 hours a day with my children. They would travel with me when I went to speaking engagements and music stuff, right? So I'm bringing this up because I went from every day with my children to my daughter just always on me, calling me all the time when I was anywhere I was, to not seeing them at all, right? And that was the toughest thing I had to do because I was going to die. I was literally going to die. We didn't go into health stuff, but all the things that were going on with my health were due to this trauma. And I was soaked. I was drowning. I couldn't do it. I had to get out. Now, I was planning on going anyway on a trip. I had some stuff to do in Miami for this events that I do in Miami every year. So I was going down there for a couple of weeks anyway. As I got away and surrounded by friends who knew me and they saw me, they're like, Aaron, what the heck's going on? They looked at me like, what's going on? Because I'd kind of been AWOL for a year, right?
Yeah.
I had to stay away. Now, did I know that it was going to take 317 days before I saw my children, saw pictures of them, spoke to them, heard any updates about them? No, I didn't know that. But that's what it was. From November 3rd until just 8 weeks ago, I had not seen them, talked to them, seen any photos of them, heard any updates, other than being basically abused with false allegations and stuff. Okay. So it was heartbreaking. And I don't know exactly what has happened to my daughter. Now, my son is 4. I swear to God, it's as if I walked out of my office from a meeting and he was on my lap. We haven't skipped a beat. I'm only seeing them right now during my daughter's soccer practice, okay, which is Mondays and Wednesdays, and her games on Saturdays. Albeit, I have a 50-50 agreement and should have them at least half the time. That's a whole other story that I'm not fighting her anymore in this kind of stuff. I'm doing it through the courts the way that it needs to be done, right? So my son, we didn't skip a beat. It's like nothing happened. My daughter won't even talk to me, won't even hear me. When I first came to her practice, she partially smiled, kind of was happy to see me, but I hadn't seen her in 10 months, right? I was there every single day, in and out for her whole life. And then all of a sudden I'm gone. So I don't know if she feels abandoned. I don't know if she was told that I'm abusive. I know that her mother says that, that I told her that I was going to take her away from her mom and never bring her back. I'm like, I've never said that. That's something she said. I've never said that. Right. And even to the fact where I told you I was flying them around the country when we're not even married to be able to keep the relationship going for her mom. Right. So I don't know how much of an earshot she got on all the false allegations saying that I molested her, which I never did, right? So I don't know what's in her mind. She was a snuggler. Like you'll see photos every day after I'm done with work. They're sitting on my lap watching TV. Does she think that was abuse now? I don't know. So I've had to not unravel that, but that's been the hardest thing for me to handle because she was a daddy's girl, man. I love my children and I love being with them constantly. So again, I'm not faulting people who go to work and are gone all day and stuff like that. I'm just saying the extreme pain that I went through from being a 24-hour a day father to nothing almost killed me. Right now, parental alienation is what you're talking about. I know that she has, and this is where the narcissism comes in. I have testimony. I have written messages from her to other people, abusing me, putting me down, calling me names, saying horrible things about me. I have audios and videos of her bad mouthing me to her friends in front of the children, all this stuff. I have everything I need for parental alienation. And she says the first day that I see her again, and she said this 4 or 5 times in text sense, I want you to know that I've never said anything bad about you to anyone or the kids. And I just had to, before I would have been like, are you friggin' crazy? Here's blah, 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 blah. I said, I just didn't even respond to that. I don't even respond. Because I'm like, okay, she's crazy. And I'm not saying crazy in like a bad way, but she is. There's something wrong up there. So It's one of the biggest problems out there is the parental alienation. And there, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but there's a humongous amount of men that commit suicide because they can't see their children, right? And there's even a story, I'm just going to put this on here and then I'll pause because this is something I'm going to solve. I'm going to, right? And we're doing it in the legal system, but there's a story that one of the people I'm working with, the Americans for Judicial Accountability, they did a documentary on this guy a few years ago who he had false allegations against him about molesting his children. He went to court, won the case, everything's dismissed, but the father-in-law didn't believe everything, shot him and killed him in the parking lot right after the hearing.
Wow.
So it's crazy that primarily women are making these false allegations. It's part of the way you do it. And there's even attorneys out there that push them to do it. It's called the silver bullet. It's called, there's different things they do to make sure the parents can't see the children. Now, the key thing that I didn't even know the first few months, and then I'll pass this back to you, is I didn't know I couldn't see my kids. She told everybody that I was abused or not allowed to see my kids, but not a single time from the allegations she filed to the 4 domestic violence injunctions she tried to file against me that were all thrown out and dismissed. Not a single time was there anything legally put down saying that I couldn't see my children. Even during the investigational point, it was non-judicial and there was nothing saying I shouldn't see my kids, but she went around and told everybody, I have an open case with the Department of Children and Families and he's not allowed to see his children. And I heard this and I believed it until I finally dug in and met with them and everything and found out that like, no, we've never told her that. We've actually thought you were seeing the children. She said you were seeing them and stuff. So well, anyway, parental alienation is, and it goes both ways. It does go both ways, but there is truth to the fact that over the generations in the family law system and the abuse and everything, it has been women, more women perpetrators in this than men. I'm not saying that men don't do false allegations. I'm not saying that men don't do parental.
Sure, it happens. Yeah.
Right. And I want it to stop across the board. So Empower Men movement is not just about men, it's about everybody. It's about the children, it's grandparents, everything, right? Because like I'm seeing, even my parents were blocked on November 15th and did not get to see their grandchildren. They still haven't seen their grandchildren. None of us got to give them gifts. Like I'm giving my kids what I could go on. I'm giving them a Christmas gift at a time right now from 2023 still.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying, that's wow.
A whole lot to your question there about, you know, about your nation.
What I'm hoping is to give these guys some hope around it. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for. But it sounds like you're still, you're still moving through a lot of it yourself right now. I mean, in reality. So I couldn't imagine being in that scenario as strongly as I feel about my kids. And I'm sure many of the dads listening feel exactly the same way. It's like, okay, it'd be like ripping. I'd rather have my limbs ripped off my body than have that happen, right? I mean, like you could do almost anything but that, right? I mean, that's how strongly we feel about it. And so yeah, I guess what I would say, like my own viewpoint without having directly dealt with anything like this. So I guess, partly I wonder if, anybody would listen to this, but I would just say that I think when you take a stand for yourself, that even though things like that can happen, that in the grand scheme of things, like it's one of those things that just has to happen. We have to make progress towards our own betterment ultimately, but also solving this issue. And, and so for the people that are willing to take that step and to take that chance, knowing there's more and more resources and more attention is being brought to this, anything's possible. Like, 400,000 signatures to Kellogg's about getting the dyes out of the cereal, for example. I mean, that didn't exist until it happened. It can happen fast. Things can happen fast. We know they're going to change something. They have to. They don't have a choice. They're being presented with like, do it or, you're going to, whatever. They have to double the prices, maybe. I don't know. But, they get so much pressure on themselves. But my point is like, that's going to happen with an issue like this eventually, but it takes guys willing to take a stand, the victims, again, using that term again, but, the victims, the people who have dealt with this, to stand up and to make that bigger change for generations and generations of fathers ahead. I mean, I think we have to keep that in mind, even though we may be risking this, but we don't, you won't know for 100%. what will happen until you take those steps. And yet, yes, there is a risk. There really is. But if you stay in it and you continue to take in the abuse, you know, then there's a lot of risks in that as well. Unfortunately, I think a lot of guys are like, well, I can handle it at least. You know, I can take the abuse, but I want to be here, make sure my kids are taken care of well enough, and I get to connect with them. I think that's the big thing. It's a one hell of a choice to have to make. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the hardest thing that I had to really come to deal with is that although I was still playing with my children, my health was deteriorating. I was becoming less and less active and able to do it, but also really understanding I couldn't deny anymore that children watch what we do and not what we tell them to do. And I was literally setting them up for having similar problems in their adulthood if I
True.
stayed in that.
Good point. Yeah.
And that's really tough to think about when you think if you don't work through your stuff, you are indirectly teaching your children to your stuff. Right.
Oh, and they don't typically get it until they're older, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of the kids. I mean, sometimes they do, but sometimes it's not until later in life. Oh, I finally found out in my 30s and 40s that actually it was mom that was the problem, so to speak, or whatever, you know. Like mom
Yeah.
was having these issues. I didn't even see it before, right? So, you know, I think okay, that's more hopeful, right? Like, because I do
Yeah.
see a lot of that where kids don't understand a lot of things when they're teenagers and in their 20s or even when they're younger. They don't understand a lot of things, but they may understand it later. And to realize that you've set an example by, you know, they'll be able to see that maybe more clearly later in life, right? And that, yeah, so there's risks on every level. But if you don't do it, then maybe you're setting them up to be in a similar kind of abuse, you know, down the line because that's what got modeled to them and they never saw another example. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it's something to consider as well. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up.
And I think about it even just in the as I'm getting healthier. If you would have seen like physically like the
Yeah.
transformation again, I'm like, whether they see it or not right now, I have to believe energetically and on a deeper level, they're getting it. They're seeing an example of a father who's taking care of himself, who's looking at his health, who's doing truly what is best for him and his family, right? As
Mhm.
much as it doesn't seem like it from one vantage point, it really does. And the proof is in the change in me and all the gathering of people around me and this army of people that are just coming to me and asking to help, right? And all these people being helped. And even as I've started to go back to the practices, all the parents and everybody coming over to me and saying, where have you been? You know, we didn't really ever believe any of that. We knew something was off here. We knew it didn't make any sense, right? And so I didn't know that. I thought they were all talking about me and hated me, but then come to
Yeah.
find out that wasn't true, right?
Right.
That
Right.
wasn't true. They didn't believe it. And I think there's one thing that arose that I really want to make sure I make clear here. And because it's a common theme that I'm founding, I think you'll understand this just from what I've heard about you from Anya, what I'm picking up from you now, what I've read about you, that people really need to look at personal responsibility. Now, there's a difference between personal responsibility and blame. I'm not saying they need to blame themselves, but they need to take personal responsibility for their role in the relationship and the evolution of the relationship. So what I mean by that is I talk to a lot of men and I've talked to women in similar situations in a custody battle, something with co-parenting issues, abuse issues, and they're usually like, they do this like, oh, this is what she's done. She's filing these false allegations. She's out telling everybody this stuff. This is horrible. How dare she do this? I need to go out there and set the records, blah, 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 blah. And once they get done, I ask them, do you want to move past this? And they say, yes, I do. I said, why do you think you're still in this? Well, because she keeps still doing this. And I'm like, okay, sure. But do you think that you resisting it and getting so angry and getting vengeful towards her and spiteful towards her is also keeping the energy in place and keeping that dynamic in place? And they're like, they kind of sit back in their chair and they're like, and I don't want to cuss right now, but I've had a lot of them say, oh shit. You know what I mean? They
Right.
start to realize that they're creating they're creating that, or they're keeping that dynamic alive just as much, right?
Yes.
By
Yes.
she's playing the victim, and then they're playing the victim to her playing the victim.
Yeah.
So they really need to, and again, it's hard when you're in it. That's why we want to create these safe spaces and all this ways for men to start to see that they actually need to heal.
Right.
Denise, the expert that I'm talking about, she says the main thing she finds in the thousands of men she's worked with is they don't say I need help. They say my partner needs help.
Right.
No, the man needs help, right? So I'm broken. I need help. I'm a survivor. I want to thrive now. So we want to build that whole path for them, right? And that's what we're doing. And it
Mhm.
starts with personal responsibility, not blame, right? There's a difference. And I had to sort that out in my own mind because my dad was a placater and stuff like that. So I had those patterns. But I had to realize that I do truly believe that everything in life happens for me. Every single thing. Now, the things that I think are happening to me is because of some sort of judgment I have about it. I just don't like it. I don't enjoy it. It's not what I want it to be, right? But it
Mhm.
is happening for me because it's always helped me grow. It's always reached me higher. It's expanded me, dove me deeper, whatever it was, right? And to really understand that every single thing that happens in our life is a gift and we don't unwrap it. And then we have to get presented that gift again. And sometimes it's given to us nicely and we say, screw that. And then sometimes it's a bat to the knee and we're laying in the hospital and here's your gift again, right? And you unwrap it. But if we can start to learn to do that and realize that it's all happening for us and even shift the central nervous system to where she's falling false allegations again. How dare she to, oh, she's doing it again. Wow, this is really bothering me. Another place I'm not yet free. Cool. I have another chance to expand my freedom. I can look at it that way, right? And start to rejoice. I know it sounds crazy. I call it, I believe that every blessing has a lesson and every lesson has a blessing. So I use the term blessed. They're all
Right.
blessings, right? So, but
Mhm.
back to what the reason I went on this tangent is that
Mhm.
men, women, anybody, everybody starts to need to realize that they are creating their own life, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. They're drawing in exactly what they need.
Right, right. That's true. I mean, yeah, your partner's there for a reason in your life. That's for sure. And
Yeah.
we have to look at why have I drawn them into my life? And I remember this is a funny story to just bring a little more lightness into a heavy conversation here for a sec. But I remember going to a gym one day and working out, and I had some person with, physical, mental, maybe disabilities. I don't know. He came up, he's a little short guy. He comes up, he says, "Okay, you want to wrestle?" I'm like, "No, I'm good." Like he's like, "Come on, let's wrestle. I can wrestle you." And I'm like, "No, that's all right. That's all right. We don't need to wrestle." And I was like, this funny little story. I was just like, well, maybe I do want to wrestle, but I'm not, then I got into martial arts a little bit. I started doing a little bit of that grappling stuff. And so like it's funny. So I know it's not exactly completely related to what you said, but it's just the whole idea. Why are you drawing bizarre scenarios to you? And what is it trying to show you? And just be curious about it and see where it leads you next. Because you're right, once you're in a place where whatever's happening and you're like, oh, okay, I guess there she goes again with that. Okay, whatever. Like, even though you could be upset about it, once you get to where the charge is little or a lot less, or
Yeah.
maybe even zero potentially, um, you'll get to a place where I promise you, because let me just put it this way, yeah, in case whoever's listening to this podcast, there are people in my life. Now they're all going to wonder if it's them. There are people in my life that have some of these tendencies, right? And I know if I draw the attention away, like you said, if I draw the attention away, that their patterns will not be as strong or they cannot survive. Yeah. I draw the energy away because I learned that pattern in my life. When people are in my life, I'm like, oh, so I'm basically supposed to just be detached here, and that's the best strategy, right? Okay, good. I can do that. I let's learn
Yeah.
to do it. Okay, just detach. Don't get into the drama, right? And so
Yeah.
learn that's the way of freedom and the best way you can really help everybody. I mean, to help yourself, help everybody, then you really do find a deeper sense of freedom. So I could relate to what you said there in other ways, not in the way that you've experienced it, but in my own way. Um, so there's hope, guys. There really is. And then the health thing you talked about, like the fact that you're able to get your health back. You can't help anybody if you're about to die because you're gonna, who knows? I mean, even in those situations, I mean, it's possible your life could be at risk. Whether it's, the physical abuse, or you get so depressed you do suicide, or your health, right? There's so many things that could happen. You're at risk, and to get honest with yourself about how you're at risk. So get yourself taken care of, then see how you can navigate the rest from there. Is
Yeah.
is the choice. So um I just know we're kind of running out of time a little bit here, but we could go on for hours, I imagine. So Aaron, I know you have this wonderful empowerment stuff that you're empowerment, that you're doing, and if you want to share more about how people can, stay in touch with you or reach out to you to get more help, that'd be so awesome.
Absolutely. So that you can find me at Aaron Ellis Official. So any social media, or go to Google, type in Aaron Ellis Official, and I'll bring up all my socials. The Empower Men Movement is empowermenmovement.com. We're building out that, so the manifesto's there. I'm starting to put some blogs up. There's going to be my whole journey and everything, and all the resources and education and everything's going to be there for whether you want to support people in healing or you're needing healing yourself, as well as the resources to thrive. You know what I mean? I'm bringing all my resources in business and stuff together too, to when these men heal and they get their self-esteem back, what do they want to do with their life? Okay, let me introduce you to the head of Lockheed Martin, stuff like that, like whatever it is, right? So to get them to be able to go forward again. So we're putting all that together. I do have another album coming out. Another thing that was taken away from me was music. Like I stopped singing, I stopped playing guitar, which was the biggest part of my life. I have another album coming out. I have my first performance since leaving this situation coming up in November in Nashville. So if you're in the Nashville area, come on out, look for, just go to, again, Aaron Ellis Official, you'll find stuff. And I do want to share one lyric from a song, if I could. I actually want to share this song with your audience. I don't know how to do it yet because the album's not out yet, but if maybe we can figure out a way for me to be able to get this song to them. I have the MP3. I just don't have a way to give it to them yet, right? Okay. But I really think this is a good way to frame it because it's about your personal world first, and then the way I wrote the song was about my personal experience in verse 1, and then I went global with it. So I'll just start with verse 1 because it's everything we've been talking about. And the song is called I Send You Love. And it's based on, regardless of what we have, how life comes at us, what we have within is what we give away. And so, like I said, the first verse is about confusion. It's about my life. And it says, lost in confusion, once again, I'm asking the reasons why you choose to hate me. In your illusion where you cast the blame, your finger points and you berate me. And every lie you tell to strike me down reminds me of my truth. The strength is found within to stand my ground, or turn and walk away and offer namaste. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into, the chorus is about I sending you love. No matter what happens, I send you love, right? So I would love to share that song with them because that's been part of my healing journey, is writing that. And where I was like, I was confused. I'm like, why am I so confused? Why is she doing this to me? So I put it into song and I'm like, okay, she's doing it to me. She's going to do it to me. I'm still going to send her love. I have a choice on how I respond, right? So I'd love to figure out a way to share that with your audience and stuff. I just couldn't figure it out in the week leading up.
By the time this airs, we might be able to put it right in the show notes if you have that available. So
I have the MP3. I just got to have a place to house it to where they can download it.
Oh, right? You'll have that all worked out, I'm sure, by the time we air. So we'll work it out. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, this is amazing. I can't wait to hear the MP3 and for everybody to be able to take that in and to be able to I'm just so grateful you came on to share a lot of education about your story. I think it's helping, a lot of guys to maybe even see things earlier on before it gets to certain levels in relationships. And even if they're in deep, like what the possibilities are. I mean, Aaron's not sitting there thinking like, I shouldn't have done it. I should still be there. I screwed up. Maybe he does every once in a great while. I think mostly he's like, yeah, I did the right thing, right? Mm-hmm. So guys, take the steps, and of course it's your own personal choice, but get the help that you need, one way or another. Get support at least. I mean, get whatever support you can. Take to his advice to heart. So anyway, Aaron, I just want to again just thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in to Just Two Conscious Guys Talking, where our mission is to impact millions of men ultimately to deepen their awakening by examining their consciousness of what's been unfolding for them with male stereotypes and programming that has allowed them to have opportunities to evolve during these times. It's an exciting time to bring more love to men and women around the world, and we are grateful for you tuning in today. Feel free to share this episode and keep tuning in, and also look in the show notes for a link to get notifications of future episodes. Until the next time, everyone, goodbye for now.